Hey guys, tonight we're traveling way, way back, like 5,000 years back, to a place where the rivers ran thick with silt, the summers were unreasonably sweaty, and the only thing colder than your neighbor's gossip was the beer. Welcome to ancient Sumer, where the wheel had just been invented, nobody wore pants, and receipts weren't digital. They were made of mud. You're about to slip into a world where beer wasn't just a drink. It was currency. It was religion. It was breakfast. And trust me, if you think losing a receipt nowadays is annoying, try doing it when it's written on a piece of sun-baked clay the size of a Pop-Tart. You're not going to make it through. A day in Sumer without accidentally getting into an argument over who drank what, when, and how many shekels of barley it was worth. Spoiler, you definitely won't win. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along the banks of the Tigris, your feet sunk in soft, warm mud that smells faintly of rotten celery. The sky is the color of dusty honey, and everything, from your goat leather sandals to your flax robe, is coated in a thin layer of dried silt, like you're unintentionally cosplaying as a living clay statue. Ahead, the city of Uruk rises, like a whisper from history's midday nap. Mud brick walls, lanky palm trees, and the angry shouts of someone who just spilled the temple of Ninkasi's precious beer. You're not a merchant, not a priest, just an ordinary Sumerian citizen. Your daily routine involves growing barley, watching irrigation canals, debating over philosophy in the form of, "I'm sure I gave you 2 jars, not 1, and occasionally helping out at the city warehouse if someone gets heat stroke or just too drunk to stand upright. Today is ration day. You and dozens of others shuffle into the wide courtyard of the granary. There's a long line, a crude clay table, and a young official named Enki Lum, whose fingernails are filed into wedge shapes for easier writing. He looks tired and a little mean, the kind of guy who blames clerical errors on the positions of the stars. You hear the murmuring around you. "I swear it's already recorded. 3 measures of grain, 1 of beer. Wrote it down 2 days ago." You're dreaming. I've only got a record from 2 days ago that says 2 measures of grain and 1 of barley water. No, that was 2 days ago. Everything revolves around these tiny fired clay lumps called tokens, early receipts. They were sealed in clay envelopes, stamped with round seals bearing bulls' heads, thick beards, or cups. What started as pictograms eventually became the first writing system humanity ever used. You watch as Enki Lum pulls out a clay tablet marked with 3 lines and a circle, meaning 3 jars of beer. He eyes you with half a glance and asks in a flat voice, "Name?" You say it. "Number of jars last time?" 3. "Got a receipt?" "Oats." "I think so. Might have fallen in the fishbone pile." Enki Lum frowns. No receipt, no beer. You're pushed to the back of the line. That's when you notice. The woman in front of you is holding a tiny clay tablet like it's a rare bird's egg. On it is a sequence of symbols, a person, 3 slashes, and a tilted cup. A receipt. You sigh? Another breakfastless day. It's okay. You have a plan. This afternoon, you'll return for a selective recovery operation, which is a fancy way of saying digging through mud near the donkey pen for the lost clay tablet. You're pretty sure you left it somewhere close to the old ash pit. As you trudge back home, the murmurs behind you echo on, the sound of a civilization trying to run its life on beer and desperately trying not to get scammed. You stop by a little roadside stall, a place selling delicacies like flame-grilled malt cakes, salted goat, and, of course, warm beer. The shopkeeper is an old woman with bulging eyes and a suspiciously luxurious mustache you've never dared ask about. She silently hands you a cup, no questions, no receipt. You take a sip. It's bitter, thick, and slightly slimy, like a soup for someone who's given up on life. You may not have a receipt. You may not get your rations from the granary. But you do have something more valuable. A story. One more day in the heart. Of Uruk, one lost clay tablet, and one sip of beer strong enough to make you forget the sun, the dust, and even the fact that Enkilim keeps forgetting your name. You wake up before the sun has had a chance to dry the dew clinging to the palm leaves. If there's such a thing as a good night's sleep in Uruk, it's probably just 3 uninterrupted hours without mosquito bites or your neighbors. Snoring like a water buffalo, you stretch, your joints cracking like underbaked bricks, and begin the day. But instead of heading to the fields or back to the granary, you turn into a narrow alley toward a low house with thick walls made of straw-mixed mud and a flat roof, a place where you hope to meet someone who can help with your receipt problem. His name is Sangamidu. He's not a priest nor a merchant. He's a receipt scribe, a rising profession, kind of like a modern notary, but more poetic. Sangamidu lives in a room cluttered with dry clay tablets, reed styluses, and palm fibers, ribbons. You're not entirely sure why a goat is pacing back and forth in there. Possibly an assistant? Lost your receipt again? He asks, still carefully carving a reed stylus. You nod, ducking to avoid the web of hanging cords that support the writing boards from the ceiling. Beer? Yeah. Temple or civilian? Civilian. 3 jars, 2 days ago, around noon. He nods, pulls out a lump of fresh clay, and begins to inscribe. You watch. And for the first time, you begin to see the artistry in something you once thought was just accounting. The slashes, the circles, the tiny bullhead symbols, they form a silent language. One that doesn't just say someone received beer, but when, from whom, where, even whether it was brewed with pure malt or mixed with dried radish. Don't laugh, that really happened. And according to Sangamidu, it led to a major lawsuit over bad beer. You ask, has anyone ever forged a receipt? He looks up, smirks. What do you think? Someone once sculpted fake tokens with imitation markings, dried them, and snuck them into the temple's vault during a rainstorm, hoping the wet would mix the real and the fake together. Unfortunately, it was sunny that day. You chuckle. Not a full laugh. More like a soft breath. The kind of reaction you have when you hear something ridiculous that still makes total sense. In Sumer. Historians still debate, Sangha says, squinting slightly as he draws the final line, whether this token and receipt system was truly the beginning of writing. Some say writing began with stories, with songs, but there's a lot of evidence that the first thing humans ever recorded was who owed whom how much beer. You glance at the tablet he's just finished. It's round and flat, sealed, with 3 small symbols neatly lined up. It kind of looks like a yawning smiley face. Don't let it dry too fast, Sangha warns, handing it to you. Keep it in the shade. If you can, bury it in dry sand until you need to present it, and don't hand it to anyone who's hungry. They might try to chew it. You thank him, feeling as relieved as someone being handed their ID back after a 3 millennium. Wait, as you leave Sangha's house, you see a group gathering outside, arguing about the rations for a soldier named Gishrum, who demanded extra beer for helping build the temple gate. An old woman hisses, "He lifted 1 brick and dropped it," someone else adds. "Better than your son. He only lifted the shadow of a brick." You pass them by, the fresh receipt tucked safely in a cloth pouch, silently hoping it doesn't rain today, or at the very least, that no one drops it into the lentil stew pot. You recall the last time you had to defend a lost receipt. It was a scorching day, so hot the clay turned soft like dough. You placed the tablet on a stone out in the yard and forgot. A dog came by and ate it. No one believed you. Honestly, you're not even sure you believe it. Under the shade of a palm, you look up at the coarse clay walls of Uruk, where tablets from 3,000 years ago are still preserved. Order forms, staff rosters, beer distribution logs, offerings to the gods. And you think, Civilization didn't begin with poetry, but with a very human question. Do I have proof of that? The air grows heavy. A passerby squints at the tablet in your hand and says with a laugh, "Careful, these days kids like to collect clay for toys. I once caught them using my receipt for a game of tablet toss." You grip the clay tighter, slipping into the shade. And then, as always, a warm gust drifts by, carrying the scent of maybe malt, maybe goat dung, possibly both. Certainly. Here's the full English translation, preserving the quiet humor and thoughtful tone of the original. You return to the storage hall in the afternoon when the heat has slumped like a tired ox flopped onto the ground. The sky over Uruk is now the color of aged wine, and your shadow stretches out twice your height. In your hand is the clay receipt, still faintly warm from the sun, and in your heart is something close to pride, as if you've just completed a grand mission, proving that you drank beer legally. At the warehouse gate, the storekeeper is chewing on something. Could be dried figs or bark. With him, the line between food and decoration is always a bit blurry. "Receipt?" he asks, without even looking up. You hold out the clay. "Token?" Like it's an ATM card. He takes it, turns it over a few times, and gives a curt nod. "Yep. Transaction confirmed. Go on in." You step inside, welcomed by the rare coolness of thick walls. The storehouse has no windows, just a few small holes, mostly for the mice. You're fairly certain you saw one wearing something like a mask, possibly a priest mouse. In the corner, the big beer jar from the other day is still there, though. Now it's more than half empty. The smell of malt lingers, mixed with old wood, and something slightly off. Maybe someone added coriander this time, the experiment of the week. You pour yourself a cup, then sit beside a low shelf. The wall across from you is where the old receipts are stored. Hundreds of clay tablets stacked like dried fish. Some are incomplete, just a few scribbles, maybe draft receipts, or maybe written by someone who drank too much and forgot everything. You recall hearing a story about a merchant named Ibizaza who once tried to write a receipt using fruit juice. Why? For the scent. The result? No one could read a thing, and his cat licked it clean. Since then, people in Uruk say, if you want to be remembered, don't use mango. Others were more creative. There was an apprentice named Lugal Tur who disliked standard markings and invented a new system of pictographic receipts. Instead of writing 3 jars of beer, he drew 3 people sprawled out with swollen bellies. Message, they've had enough. At first, everyone laughed. But then a high priest saw the drawing and said, symbolic, philosophical. After that, Lugal Tur became Sumer's first beer carving artist. He even held an exhibition. With pastries, you rest your chin on your hand, cup in the other, eyes half closed. A breeze slips through a wall crack, carrying the rhythmic sound of footsteps outside. Probably some builders walking past, arguing about whether to use square or triangular bricks for the new city gate. You hear them bickering, square bricks stack easier, but triangle bricks ward off the wind god. The wind god only blows on dumb things, like your hat. You're not sure who wins. A cat jumps onto the shelf across from you, stares at you, then at your beer, as if about to negotiate. It meows softly. You offer it some oat bread. It refuses. Clearly it has refined tastes. You glance back at your used receipt. It will now go into the archive system. In a large jar in the corner, they stack those clay tablets like a library, with no borrowers. And if anyone ever needs to verify something, say, whether you really were given beer on the Wednesday of the second moon, in the 3rd season after the big rains, they'll have to dig through it like some prehistoric puzzle. Historians are still debating, you recall Sangamidu's words, whether this counts as the world's first administrative office. Some say no, it's just storage. Others say it's protocol. But to me, it's proof that humanity has long loved confirmation. Makes sense. In a world without printers, without Google Drive, without a group chat to verify what everyone drank yesterday, a hardened piece of dirt with some odd symbols was your best defense of personal honor. You lean back against the earthen wall. The sun outside has mellowed. Inside, the sound fades into near silence, just a cat scratching its back against the receipt jar, and the slow, steady breathing of the storekeeper who is now dozed off. You think, isn't it strange? In a grand civilization like Sumer, with its hanging gardens, towering temples, and copied texts on astronomy, the thing people remembered most clearly was, I received beer. And you don't want anyone to forget that, especially not yourself. Sure. Here's the full English translation of your scene, keeping the gentle humor, atmosphere, and subtle wit of the original. Outside, the sun is beginning to give way to a thin golden dust, like mist, except this mist is mule-delivered, and suspiciously slow. You leave the storehouse, still holding your empty beer cup, and begin walking down the baked brick road toward the central market of Uruk. At dusk, the market is a swirl of scents, noise, and bizarre deals. You pass a man selling bottled shade, essentially empty clay jars, but he swears by the god Enki. Just open it at noon, and it'll feel 2 degrees cooler. In one corner, a crowd has gathered around a public inscription board. It's the new price list for wheat, camels, and, you blink, custom clay receipt engraving fees. What does that mean? A young man next to you explains, now there's a service for personalized receipt carving, like you want to say you got 2 jars of beer, but you want it to be written like a love poem. You chuckle. Do people really write love poems on receipts? He nods. There was this guy named Ishkur, once gave his lover a tablet that said, I received 3 measures of grain, but my heart belongs to you. Whether his lover appreciated it is unclear. Modern scholars, however, remain deeply confused. You pause at a small stall, where a woman is pressing symbols into a clay tablet by hand. Each mark is slow, deliberate, like writing a diary. On the table are many wedge-shaped signs, but also some odd little drawings, a laughing cow, a tree with legs, a flying beer cup, custom orders. You ask? She nods. Today someone asked for a tablet to give his mother that says, don't forget to buy onions. So I drew an onion with wings. You think to say something, but instead just nod. Somehow you like the feeling here. In an ancient civilization where someone still wants to carve a joke into clay, while you, in the modern day, set reminders on apps and still forget your passwords. You turn into a smaller alley leading to the administrative quarter. This is where priests and scribes work, people who live among tablets and codes, math, and the occasional ridiculous dispute. Once, you remember, 2 men argued over a receipt that read, I delivered 2 jars of oil, 3 buckets of honey. The other man insisted, no, it was 3 jars of oil, 2 buckets of honey. In the end, the scribe had to ask, then who drank the extra 2 buckets of honey? The answer, a cow, and it was not pleased. You step into a small room where a scribe is working. His table is covered in tablets, papyrus scrolls, and a cloth with what looks like bean paste. Hello, he says without looking up. Here, to check a receipt? You nod. I want to see one from last moon. Says I received beer from brewery number 2. He rummages. His hands move like wind. His eyes know instantly which tablets are old and which have been nibbled by mice. Finally, he pulls one out and gently blows off the dust. Here, your name's on it. Also a drawing. A person trying to balance 2 jars of beer. You scratch your head. I don't remember asking for that image. He chuckles. The engraver got playful. You thank him and leave, your mind echoing with a thought. These people, with hands full of dirt and minds full of stories, had invented not just the first storage system, but also the first clay-based jokes. And then, as if on cue, someone yells from behind, has anyone seen my tablet, the one with me hugging a rooster? Another voice shouts back, you put it in the love poem jar. You can't help but laugh. In Uruk, the difference between I bought a chicken and I love you might just be a single misplaced wedge. Historians still debate whether the Sumerian clay tablet system was truly an invention of bureaucratic control, or just a long chain of impulsive notes from a culture that loved beer, chickens, and a kind of accuracy that was approximate at best. You think maybe it was both. And maybe that's exactly what made Sumer not just the birthplace of writing, but the birthplace of the stories you're now starting to dream about. Certainly, here's the full English translation of your beautifully written scene, preserving the poetic tone, light humor, and reflective atmosphere. You stop by the banks of the Euphrates, where the sunset begins to spread across the water like a red carpet rolled out for wandering thoughts. The air cools, but still carries the warm scent of baked clay, the kind of smell that only exists in a city built entirely of mud. You sit on a stone slab, listening to the steady splash of oars from a small boat filled with empty jars on its way to fetch beer. The rower begins to sing, the words unclear, but the rhythm makes you want to breathe more slowly. Maybe songs like that were how ancestors once passed messages before they ever learned to carve letters. Suddenly, a child darts past you, clutching a still damp clay tablet. He almost trips, then turns and grins. Mama told me to bring this. To the scribe, I wrote, I was good all day, but she doesn't believe me. You raise an eyebrow? You carved it yourself? He nods. I used the handle of a spoon. Pretty, right? You look at the tablet, seeing a row of crooked signs, as if someone tried to write Latin left-handed in the dark. But there's one clear image, a laughing donkey. You burst out laughing. Pretty sure that'll get approved. The child runs off, leaving you with a thought. Why did the Sumerians go through so much trouble to create a way to store everything? Was it really that necessary? The answer, you think, lies farther down the path, where you once witnessed a major meeting between city officials and the heads of barley farms. A dusty room more crowded than the fish market, with one unspoken rule. Whoever had the tablet, proving their side, won. Once a farm owner leapt to his feet, waving a tablet in the air. I delivered all 80 bushels. It's carved right here. Another man jumped in. No, that's last year's tablet. This year you delivered 78. A priest quietly added, the symbol last year was a 3-legged cow. This year, it's a 4-legged cow. Clearly, this year. Everyone nodded in agreement. You're not sure what's stranger, that a 3-legged cow became a symbol of time, or that no one questioned it. In this society, time wasn't just days or months. It was the shape of animals. There was a year of the one-eyed chicken, a year of the goat-jumping rope. A calendar system both convenient and hilarious, and utterly baffling for archaeologists thousands of years later. You recall once seeing a special set of tablets, a full record of beer orders for a royal wedding. One read, 25 large jars for musicians, excluding horn player who avoids beer. Another, 15 jars for the king's mother-in-law. Specify good jars, no added water. And the last, carved with a shaky hand, 1 jar for the tablet carver, a bonus, because my hand hurts. You think of the people who created this system. They didn't just want to count, they wanted to be heard, to be trusted, to be seen inside a story, whether it was about beer deals or royal weddings. And then you recall a little-known fact, the very first clay tablet ever discovered. It doesn't record some grand history, but simply still owed 3 measures of grain, meaning everything began with debt. Historians still debate whether writing was invented to tell epic tales, or just to make sure someone actually returned the jar they borrowed. You, however, are certain of one thing. The Sumerians believed memory was more easily lost than a mule carrying beer. So they wrote it all down. The sun has now fully set. On the river, the beer boat glimmers under torchlight. You close your eyes, listening to the oars, the wind, and the voice of a distant civilization still whispering through. Baked clay. I remember I gave you 3 jars. You lean back against an old stone, your back warmed by the heat still lingering from the afternoon sun. Night begins to fall, and the wind from the Euphrates carries with it the scent of fermented barley. The hum of insects starts to replace the city sounds. You close your eyes, then reopen them at the sound of a steady creaking. The beer delivery cart, its wooden wheels groaning against the ground like they're complaining about life. The beer deliverer stops the cart in front of a small house where the flicker of an oil lamp spills faintly through a curtain of coarse fabric. You quietly follow, watching as a woman opens the door, hands on her hips. Late again. I ordered this jar 3 days ago. The deliverer pulls out a clay tablet, blows the dust off, and holds it up. But ma'am, the tablet clearly says, "Deliver after the offering to Enki." And as you know, the offering was delayed yesterday, because the priest caught a cold. The woman frowns, then nods. All right, the priest. She takes the beer jar inside, muttering, "Too much beer, that one." You can't help but laugh. Seems no era is free from the old, "I ordered it days ago" complaint. But what impresses you is how no one needs to argue for long. One look at the tablet, and the matter is settled. The tiny marks on that dried piece of clay are enough to make people agree, as if they were proof of some higher objective truth. You start to think about how a civilization chose to place more faith in writing than in spoken words. Not because they didn't trust each other, but because they knew each other too well. When beer became valuable enough to record every single jar, that was when trust shifted. From the heart to a lump of clay. A kind of emotional transformation that was deeply practical. And then you remember a funny detail from the Royal Archive tablets. A small round piece of clay, barely the size of a coin, hastily carved with the left hand. The wobbly inscription read, "No beer left, apologies, resupply after wedding." Historians still debate whether that tablet might be the first written apology in history, but one thing's for sure. It's among the earliest known examples of customer service. You get up and wander down a narrow alley where the light from oil lamps pours out like honey. There's a smell of grilling. Someone's roasting fish over a clay stove. A boy nearby, wearing a mask made of gourd shell, eats while telling his little sister a story about the scribe ancestor whose pen was hidden by the wind god. You come closer and ask, "Do you know his name?" The boy nods. His name was Lugal-Zigzag. Because his handwriting was so squiggly, the villagers just called him that. You laugh. History is sometimes written by people with bad handwriting. The girl chimes in, "But he was the first to carve his name onto a beer jar, even though he misspelled it." You blink. Misspelled? Yep. Instead of Lugal-Zigzag, it came out Lugal-Zigzag, but everyone got used to it, so it stuck. You nod. For the first time in history, a typo became a title. Their story reminds you that writing wasn't always about solemn things. Sometimes the Sumerians wrote because they needed to remember, sometimes because they wanted to be remembered, and sometimes simply because they had free time and a lump of wet clay in their hands. You recall a morning when an old potter told you, "Nothing lasts longer than a typo carved into clay, unless someone accidentally drops it." Above, the stars begin to glimmer, their faint light like thousands of tablets drawn upside down across the sky. And you know, in that world, every person who once lived, once recorded, once borrowed beer and forgot to return it, left behind a faint trace, dry, cracked, and quietly eternal. You walk along a Sumerian street in the soft, shaded light of dawn. The sun is still stretching itself awake behind the low rooftops, and the air is rich with scent. Millet flatbread, sweetgrass water, and something that smells like wet. Plaster and apprentice sweat. A group of children is studying under the eaves of a long house, their chanting voices drifting like an ancient soundtrack. An old teacher, His hair tied high with a hemp string, paces back and forth with a bamboo stick in hand, calling out, "Today's lesson, carve 2 jars of beer, 1 person drinking. Anyone who messes up the grammar drinks the ink." You're not sure if he's joking, but judging by the kids' faces, green as boiled herbs, none of them seem willing to find out. You sit nearby watching a small hand tremble as it carves each tiny stroke into a piece of wet clay. No pencils, no paper, just earth, reed, and a level of patience far beyond what's reasonable for learning a profession that never gets a summer break. Because in Sumer, to learn writing wasn't just to learn letters, it was to learn how to wrap time inside clay, each mark a promise. I witnessed this, I understood that, and I know. People will forget unless I write it down. And so, boys of 9 or 10 learned to carve beer orders, grain receipts, and even grander things like, "Mom said, be home before sunset." Historians still debate whether the earliest Sumerian writing schools were training grounds for scholars or assembly lines for contract clerks. But either way, students had to memorize hundreds of clunky signs, then carefully inscribe them into clay as if writing the fate of a drinking party. You rise and walk past a row of storage buildings where old clay tablets are kept like a living museum. There you see a small room with a sign hung by the scribes. No beer paid, no name carved. An elderly man with a long beard is holding a large tablet, his hands trembling as he places it on a shelf. He turns to you, squinting in the sunlight, and says quietly, "This is the record of the last time I borrowed 5 jars of beer from the baker. After that day, we weren't friends anymore." You nod gently, without asking, a lump of clay, a friendship bound together just like that. In Sumer, beer wasn't just a drink. It was social glue, currency, and offering to the gods, and one of the earliest excuses for writing a note. You recall a particularly curious tablet found in Lagash. It recorded 2 jars of beer, 1 silk ribbon, 1 kiss. Scholars of course still debate. Was the kiss an official unit of exchange, or just a whimsical aside? You step out of the archive. Sunlight spills over your shoulders like a whisper. A young woman carrying a ceramic jug walks by, humming a tune about an old merchant who forgot to sign a receipt and had to sleep in the yard the entire autumn. Perhaps beyond just teaching writing and memory, Sumerian civilization taught one more thing. If you've made a promise, carve it. You gently touch a tablet resting on a windowsill. It's clearly inscribed, "Incomplete beer delivery, penalty, 3 dried fish." Your face stretches into a smile. Dried fish as a fine? Honestly, it sounds more reasonable than many modern invoices. You stroll on, your mind drifting with the rhythm of a time when writing began to bring comfort through being remembered accurately. Beneath your feet, small pebbles crunch like ancient whispers, and perhaps, if you listen long enough, you might hear someone murmuring, "I once carved my name onto a beer jar, and the beer carved me into history." You follow a young boy carrying a basket of clay as he walks along the edge of a canal. Water murmurs below, reflecting sunlight in shimmering streaks on the baked brick walls. The sky feels wide and low, as if leaning in to listen to each story. Told in earth. The boy doesn't say much. He glances at you, then holds out a small clay tablet on which is carved, 3 jars of beer traded for 1 chicken, mother approved. You're not sure if that last part counts as a legal signature, but it makes you laugh aloud, causing the boy to blush. He leads you to a small market where merchants are selling everything, from shell bracelets and red-dyed yarn to bags of fermented mud advertised to cure knee pain, or at least distract you from it with its overpowering smell. You stop at a modest stall. On the table lie dozens of clay tablets, each with different shapes and sizes, all covered in writing. The vendor, an old woman, nearly toothless, smiles with squinting eyes and says, "Old records here, very precious. Like buying pieces of Life, you pick up one tablet inscribed with 5 jars of beer, wedding feast, ox arrived late. A story unfolds before your eyes like an ancient reel of film. The crowd outside, the scent of jasmine and kitchen smoke, the bride's mother yelling, "Where's the ox? No ox! No wedding!" Another tablet is simpler. 1 jar of beer. Gift to an old friend. Remembered the big rain. Just a few strokes, yet it feels as personal as a handmade birthday card. You don't buy anything. But the old woman presses a small piece of clay into your hand and says, "This one is for remembering, not for sale." You walk out of the market feeling as if you're holding a fragment of time, a piece carved by someone, just to make sure that, amid the dust and noise of history, they had a moment worth remembering. You turn into a side street where people are engraving directly onto beer jars. One craftsman dips a stick into soft clay while muttering, "Write his name clearly. Last time they mixed up the delivery, and his wife thought our beer was temple wine." You can't help but laugh. Someone else squeezes in, holding a large jar, saying, "Add a line, no refunds if already sipped." Laughter breaks out, and you realize, here in Sumer, carved lines weren't just receipts. They were daily notes, frozen chuckles. Historians still debate whether Sumerian merchants were the first to invent the social contract. But when you see how precisely they wrote things like beer to be delivered when the sun is low, if higher, not accepted, it seems the answer leans toward yes. They thought of everything. Another child darts by holding a small tablet, yelling, "Father says carve it quick, the customer's waiting." You turn to watch the figure vanish behind the buildings and think, writing wasn't first used to record glory, it was to say, "I owe you, and I remember that." You walk toward the kiln, where freshly written clay tablets are fired into permanence. A sun-weathered craftsman gestures toward the glowing pieces and says, "This is the moment when the temporary becomes unforgettable." You stand watching the fire dance, listening to the soft crackling, like the breath of time. Those clay records will survive thousands of years, long after their authors have turned to dust. You shiver, not from fear, but from a strange feeling, as if you, too, had just carved something into the earth. A young woman appears, balancing a basket full of tablets. "To the temple," she says. "The gods need accountants, too." You chuckle, bow slightly, and continue walking, your heart full of something you cannot name. Only know that you're walking among the very first. Memories ever written down by humanity, and they whisper, "We once lived, and we once traded beer." You follow the footsteps along narrow stone-paved streets where the golden glow of sunset gently brushes against baked clay walls. In the air, the scent of poppy flowers and freshly dug earth blends with the light aroma of beer from nearby jars, forming a fragrance as soothing as an ancient lullaby. You come across a group gathered around a wooden table, on which rests a freshly inscribed clay tablet. An elderly man with bright eyes reads aloud, "Today, 10 jars of beer in exchange. For 5 sacks of grain, contract between Enki and Gilgamesh." You can't help but laugh. Gilgamesh, the famed hero of legend, now tangled in paperwork like you sorting out monthly expenses. A young woman beside the old man gently remarks, "But you know, there's something even more fascinating here. These aren't just orders, they're how society kept its order." You lean in, examining the tablet. Indeed, beyond listing quantities of beer, it contains rules. No drinking before the designated time. Customers may not take more beer than allowed, and even violators will perform light labor under the sun. Hearing about these rules makes you chuckle quietly. A punishment like working under the sun feels like an ancient version of no air conditioning for you. A soft blend of seriousness and practicality, something the Sumerians surely didn't imagine would become legendary legislation. You recall a lesser-known story about a feast in Uruk where a merchant miscounted the beer, and the result was that everyone had to drink more to make up for the error. Sometimes, it seems, forgetting to sign a receipt could accidentally turn the whole city into one big party. Historians still debate whether these rules laid the foundation for a primitive legal system or were simply helpful notes to keep celebrations in check. Either way, you sense in them a curious harmony between discipline and delight. You step into a clay-walled house where a woman is carefully carving her name onto a small clay tablet. She says, "Write it down so no one can say, 'I didn't.'" No. These days, not everyone can read, but everyone can drink beer. You smile, imagining modern bartenders needing writing lessons just to keep their orders straight. You feel more than ever the deep connection between people and beer, between writing and daily life. Each clay tablet is more than a receipt. It's a tiny fragment of life, friendship, and quiet, knowing laughter. As you step back outside, the sunset bathes the clay bricks in amber, making them glow like little gems. You think perhaps it was from these humble bits of earth that civilization first learned how not to let memory fade into shadow. You let out a long sigh, feeling a sweet kind of weariness, like the kind that comes after a journey that was long, yet soft and gentle. Certainly. Here's the English translation of your atmospheric and reflective passage. You walk slowly into the area near the temple, where the gentle sounds of water flowing from a small canal mingle with the cheerful chirping of birds. A cool breeze drifts by carrying the scent of eucalyptus leaves and freshly fired clay. Everything seems to slow down, and your mind feels as soft as the clay tablets resting nearby. Here, you see a group of people inscribing tablets, not to record debts or trades, but for religious rituals. A man dressed in a long white linen robe, solemn in bearing, is reading aloud from one such tablet. On this day, 7 jars of beer are offered to the god Nana in hopes of a bountiful harvest and peaceful sleep. You can't help but smile at the thought of worshiping beer, as if beer were a second deity alongside the existing gods. But in truth, for the Sumerians, beer was a divine gift, passed down from the gods as a small miracle to ease the burdens of life and bring people together. A young woman, holding a small clay tablet with her name etched into it, explains that the receipts also detail who is in charge of brewing the beer for the temple, who will distribute it, and the exact amount allocated for each ceremony. She tells you softly, "If you don't have a receipt, the gods won't hear your prayers." You chuckle quietly, yet you can't deny the seriousness with which they treat these clay records. They are not just documents. They are bridges between the human world and the divine, a kind of sacred license for peace and order. You recall a little-known story of a great beer festival, where priests and commoners drank together in harmony, accompanied by songs and stories told through the night. In those moments, the clay tablets weren't just records. They were promises, a commitment to uphold tradition. Historians still debate the true role of beer in Sumerian religious ceremonies, but to you it feels like a beautiful way to connect people with each other and with something greater than themselves. You glance up at the twilight sky, thinking of the characters carved into clay, how they will endure long after we are gone. A gentle thought fills you, that even as time flows on, the simple stories and warm laughter of the Sumerians will continue to echo. You walk slowly, your footsteps mingling with the sound of running water, and a calmness spreads through you. Once again you realize that history is not only made of battles and dynasties, but also of small clay tablets, humble stories from everyday life that we so often overlook. Here is the English translation of your passage. You walk along the narrow canal, the gentle babbling of water like a soft melody, lulling you into a state of calm. The scent of damp earth and earthenware jars filled with beer mingles with the aroma of medicinal herbs, creating a pleasant atmosphere like an ancient natural spa. You see an old scribe carefully carving into a clay tablet, his hands moving swiftly as if drawing musical notes on a staff. He smiles at you and says, "These receipts are not just records, they are a way to preserve the truth." You nod, recalling the frustration of losing a modern electricity or water bill, a small loss, but enough to drive you crazy, he tells. You a curious story? Once a Sumerian merchant forgot to get a receipt for a shipment of beer, and for months he had to go back and forth explaining and persuading each person to reclaim his rights. You can imagine him as an ancient version of today's office worker. Forget to sign, and the whole world turns its back on you. He explains that these receipts also helped avoid disputes. When someone claimed, "I never received the beer," they could show the clay tablet as proof. But you, he winks, if you lose the receipt, that's on you. You smile softly. This sounds just like the warning, keep your contract or lose your money. Historians still debate whether Sumerian receipts were the precursors of modern contracts or just simple administrative papers. Either way, you clearly see they were the first steps toward a more orderly society, much like using a budgeting app today. You also hear a little-known fact. The oldest clay tablet recording a beer receipt dates back over 5,000 years, older than even the famous love letters you've heard of. You smile, imagining a relaxed Sumerian brewing beer and wondering how to record orders for his friends without forgetting. As you gaze at the wedge-shaped cuneiform carved on the clay tablets, you feel a strange bond between people, beer, and the little stories. These fragments of history teach you that, whether thousands of years ago or today, keeping promises and proving something remains essential. You continue walking, each step like the gentle drumbeat of an ancient symphony, your heart soothing in the cool, peaceful air of the Sumerian afternoon. You continue walking through the bustling markets of Uruk, where the laughter and chatter of the people echo like a gentle symphony in the warm afternoon light. The scent of beer mingles with the aroma from bread stalls and fresh fruit, creating a lively and pleasant scene like a small festival within the neighborhood. You stop by a stall where a young woman is engraving characters onto a clay tablet. She explains that these receipts not only help prevent disputes, but also allow tavern owners to know exactly how much beer to prepare, thus balancing supply and demand with subtlety. You think to yourself, this is just like modern food delivery apps, except instead of an app, they use clay and a stylus. She shares an interesting story. Once, a tavern was recorded with the wrong amount of beer, forcing the owner to hold a beer exchange event to clear up the misunderstanding. Everyone ended up drinking a little more, and that evening became an unofficial celebration full of joy and laughter. You chuckle, thinking that even thousands of years ago, people knew how to turn mistakes into opportunities for happy gatherings. You recall records about different types of beer, some reserved for kings, others for common folk, and even varieties mixed with honey or herbs to enhance flavor and offer mild medicinal benefits. One type was said to help with restful sleep, and hearing that makes you feel comforted. Historians still debate whether these beers were truly used as sedatives or simply as recreational drinks. But you know for sure that whatever the oik, case beer was an indispensable part of Sumerian cultural and social life. You clearly sense the friendliness and warmth in every story and every tiny clay tablet, as if they are whispering tales of a peaceful, warm era filled with laughter. You continue walking through the warm, golden glow of sunset, hearing your footsteps blend with laughter, the soft tapping of the stylus on clay, together composing a soothing lullaby that helps you relax and dream as you journey through time and space. Here's the English translation of your passage. You continue weaving through the narrow alleys of Uruk, where everything feels quiet and steeped in ancient hues. You hear the gentle clicking of bamboo styluses carving into clay, blending with the wind rustling through tall palm trees. The cool air makes you feel as if you've stepped to a fairy tale library room where knowledge and peace coexist. You spot a group of children learning to create the first cuneiform signs on small clay tablets. A teacher gently guides each stroke with patience and tenderness, as if teaching a lullaby to future generations. You suddenly think, if there were classes like this today, surely we'd have many more future historians, or at least some. Expert receipt scribes. An elder from the group tells you that learning cuneiform didn't start just to record commercial transactions or beer receipts, but also to capture poems, folk songs, and even humorous stories for children. A fun way to relax and entertain, very much like scrolling through memes or funny videos on your phone today. You hear a gentle reminder that historians still debate who truly invented writing, whether it was the Sumerians or another culture that contributed to this miracle. But one thing is certain, nowhere else linked writing so intricately and delicately to recording small yet important things like beer receipts. A little-known fact is revealed. In Sumerian times, people even used small clay tablets like membership cards to claim free beer during festivals or birthdays. You chuckle quietly, thinking, this sounds like an ancient loyalty program. You continue walking, your heart calming as the slow-forming cuneiform signs blend with the wind and rustling. Sounds of the past, carrying you gently into a soft, vivid dream of a distant yet vibrant world. Here's the English translation of your passage. You make your way toward the eastern edge of Uruk, once the hub for distributing grain and, yes, plenty of beer. This area isn't bustling like the markets, nor as solemn as the temples, but it carries a special rhythm, like the steady sound of a millstone or the steady breath of a well-fed city. An elderly man with salt and pepper hair and a gentle smile is arranging large beer jars into wicker baskets. He tells you about the golden age when every family was allotted a monthly share of barley and beer, carefully recorded on clay tablets. Unlike electricity bills, he jokes, these receipts often came with a smile. You're shown an ancient storage room lined with dozens of clay tablets neatly organized by category paid, unpaid, and a special section labeled minor disputes. The name sounds like a group chat of friends deciding on where to grab drinks, but can't quite agree. A young woman responsible for archiving seriously explains, these are proof that the Sumerians not only knew how to brew beer, but also how to handle conflicts politely. An interesting fact emerges. Sometimes, when beer ran out before the next batch was ready, Sumerian distributors would temporarily substitute the rations with barley bread, accompanied by a cute note like, sorry, your beer is still fermenting. Please, accept bread for now. Historians still debate whether this was a temporary fix or an ancient PR strategy. You lightly tap on a weathered receipt. It belonged to a potter who recorded receiving 3 jars of beer in exchange for a dinnerware set. A perfectly reasonable trade, you think to yourself. You can almost hear the potter's quiet chuckle from thousands of years ago, pleased with the deal. As the sunset casts its warm glow over Uruk's baked brick roofs, you realize that these small clay tablets, seemingly dry and dull, are full of stories, habits, and the quiet humor of a civilization that knew how to savor life one sip of beer at a time. A whisper in the wind seems to invite you to sit down, close your eyes, and imagine a small feast where people raise their cups, share tales, and laugh as if time means nothing at all. As night falls over Uruk, the ancient city gradually sinks into a quietness as soft as feather grass. You leave the beer storage and return to the main street where flickering oil lamps cast light through small window panes. You slow your pace, not because of tired feet, but because each step feels like a deeper journey into a world both strange and familiar, as if you have always known it through dreams. A group of elderly musicians plays a low, gentle melody on wooden and bronze instruments. You realize they are singing about a god, not of war, not of love, but the patron god of accounting. Yes, the Sumerians had a deity dedicated to record-keeping and measurement. An old man whispers to you, without that god, No one would. Know who owes whom how much beer. You hear a little-known detail. Once, the Sumerian rulers organized a community debt cancellation day, where old clay receipts were brought to the square and thrown into the fire, a kind of reset for their financial system, clay tablet style. Historians still debate whether it was a social justice policy or just a clever way to restart the economy. Either way, if you have any unpaid bills, you'd probably wish for such a day right now. Along the way, a girl about 7 years old hands you a small clay tablet. Instead of cuneiform, it bears simple drawings, a mug of beer, a loaf of bread, and a smile. "For you," she says in pause, a voice like a fairy tale whisper. You feel as if you've just received your first receipt, not to exchange for beer, but for a tender moment. You sit down on a step leaning against a wall of bricks aged by time. Nothing left to do, nothing left to understand, only the sound of the wind weaving through the old streets, the scent of yeast and baked clay, and a feeling as gentle as a long embrace. Now you close your eyes. Every detail from the journey, from the tiny clay receipts, the soft scratch of the reed stylus, to the story of a civilization that patiently recorded every sip of beer in clay, drifts by, like golden dust in the wind, lightly, slowly, and softly, like a river flowing at night. The narrator's voice lowers, soft as a thin blanket draped over your shoulders. No clear images remain, only the sensation of drifting through time, through layers of baked earth, through whispered stories, until you no longer need to stay awake. You have recorded it all. No need for clay, no need for writing, just dreaming.